So I'd like to apologize in advance for my breathing. It still costs me a lot to not sit, basically. I still have energy issues. I still have a lot of swelling issues and all that fun stuff. But as weird as this is going to sound, I could not bring myself to do this particular video sitting. I just had too much energy, which is probably going to come across in my movements a lot during this video. So I do apologize for the fact that I'm kind of panting for breath, because I really am. I'm actually short of breath here. Apologies. Normally, when I do these, I have my little pad, right? And I pull it out and I'm like, okay, let's go ahead and look over this and see what we've got, and try to figure out, what it is that that I can do. And I take little notes, just stuff like that. And occasionally, I'll have about, this much. This is about the average, about half a page's worth of, really brief notes and kind of things, just things to jog my memory. Because I always do these immediately after I watch the episode, and this is true in this case too. Sometimes I'll fill up the whole page. This is page 1. There's page 2. And there's page 3. Let's start off with something weird. I know that I'm not exactly the most popular guy in the world, but part of why I felt compelled to do this right now is because I really have the most horrible thought that one of the people who worked on this episode might actually watch this video. And as weird as it's going to sound, I know exactly what it's like to have negative criticism, especially about something you know is bad. I'll get into that a little bit, but I want to talk about Brandon Braga, okay? Now, any of you who are Star Trek fans in any way, shape, or form probably know that name. For those of you who don't, I'll go ahead and tell you, Brandon Braga is arguably one of the most common writers in the modern era. He wrote or worked on a lot of scripts for TNG, and a huge chunk of scripts, 40 plus, I believe, for Voyager, and he also worked on Enterprise. So, pretty common guy. The reason I say he's kind of famous among Star Trek fans is not really in a good way, because for the most part he's most well renowned for making kind of crap episodes. And it's actually kind of unfortunate, because I always found myself feeling bad for the man for two big reasons. Number 3 reasons, actually, which I'm going to go over now, because I do think this is relevant, so forgive me for starting with this. Number 1, Brandon Braga has actually given us good episodes. Over in TNG, he gave us Timescape and Parallels. Whether you like those or not, I personally thought they were really good. In Voyager, he gave us Scorpion, and Future Tense or Future Times or whatever that one is called, and a few other really good episodes. And the interesting thing about Brandon Braga is if you actually analyze him, he has a very distinctive writing style. I've talked about this with regards to Metzen as well, Chris Metzen over on the Blizzard thing. Both men can do as good as they can bad, but both of them have very distinctive styles to their writing, stuff that they're obviously much better at. And I think most writers have that. Most writers are better at this than that, right? I mean, that's just life. So one of the things Brandon is really good at is stream of consciousness. Okay, he's really good at doing the sort of thing where the story kind of moves and flows, and there's sort of a mystery involved, and things don't really make sense, all things considered, but they're not really supposed to, because, projections here in Voyager is an episode he done, and a pretty good example of both his strengths and his weaknesses in one episode, if I were to put it into such words. One other thing I've noticed about Brandon Braga is that he has... Well, I don't know what to call this. I'm sure there's a proper literary term. He's the kind of writer who tends to work better when he works in a collaborative effort. Most of his best episodes, and the ones that he does that are really well, he did with a gentleman called Joe Manoski. But he's also done work with several other writers. And this is a thing, in books and in movies and television or whatever, where someone is in either passable or a hit or miss writer or an author, but when they do a collaborative effort, when they really hash everything out between either one other person or two other people or whatever, their strengths really come forward because they work better in a group. That's just how some people write, And Brandon Braga very much strikes me as that kind of guy. When you add him to another decent writer and the two work together, Brandon Braga goes from acceptable hit or miss writer to really good writer. And so I do have a deal of respect for the man, all things considered. On top of that, that's point 1. Point 2 is really important to me. No matter what I do, I cannot seem to get away from Mass Effect 3. And I know that's a weird way to start this, but bear me out, okay? Of all the things about Mass Effect 3 that pissed me off the most, The absolute top of the list was the fact that they weren't apologetic about it. They were frankly rude about the entire thing. The entire affair was about how it was our fault. We were the ones with the problem. We were the ones who didn't understand their artistic visions. We were the ones who they were willing to meet halfway because you're the one with the problem, but we'll go ahead and try to talk down to your level. And that pisses me off. And the complete opposite end of this is Brown and Braga. Brown and Braga has always been very human and very open and overt, upfront, and generally honest about his things. And not only has he said on more than one occasion, yeah, I'm not the greatest writer around, and I'll talk about a little bit why in the third thing, but on top of that, he has publicly apologized more than once. Not just for his bad episodes, but for this one. For Threshold. So I'm willing to give him some credit just for that. I really am. Third point is Rick Berman. I know this is a contentious topic amongst Star Trek fans. I know it is. I am one of the people of the opinion that Rick Berman is the worst thing that has ever happened to Star Trek. Whatever good he may have done early on in the TNG era when he kind of took the reins from Roddenberry, he completely shattered and destroyed when he completely annihilated the Star Trek movie franchise, is pretty much the reason why I'd say about half of the things wrong with Voyager were wrong, and is pretty much the reason why almost all of the things wrong with Enterprise were wrong. And it was, and I've already told you several stories about this gentleman, and just look him up. I mean, he is not a very well-liked man, just to put it as bluntly as I can. But one thing I can place directly on Rick Berman's head, or skull, I guess, is he did not nurture Brannon Braga. Now, you may ask what I mean by that. When you're working on something like a television show, you have to think long-term. I'm sorry, you do. Even when I was talking about recently about the budget, you can't think about it in just terms of this episode. You have to think about it in terms of the season or the next season or whatever. You have to be thinking in a television show about tomorrow. So if you have a good writer who puts out a few good episodes, what do? Do you take them in and say, well, you're good at these things, but you're bad at these things? Let's try to shore up your weaknesses. Let's try to enforce your strengths. Let's try to really work with you and get you some experience with some other writers that we have, some good writers we have. Really get you in there and try to develop you bit by bit into a great writer. Or, I have a great idea. Let's fling a piece of paper in front of you and say, write me 28 episodes right now so we can start this new series. I'm exaggerating a little bit for effect. I do apologize. But the bottom line here is that Rick Berman wasted the potential of Brannon Braga. And so I'm willing to give him, Brannon Braga, that is, some credence on this. And I do have to say that I feel bad for the man. If you're actually watching this, Brannon Braga, and I know that's like a 1 in a billion chance, I got nothing against you. I really don't. Even though I'm going to be spending the next, I don't know however long, destroying this episode. By the way, this is going to be a long video. Before we really get into it, I want to talk about two more things here really quick. First and foremost, let's talk about McNeil, the gentleman who plays Tom Paris. I like him. He's a good actor. Does a pretty decent job. He's very human, very down to earth. I think that's kind of what they like about him. And as I've said before, Tom Paris is arguably my favorite, second or third favorite, easily in the top 3 of characters across Star Trek Voyager, and deserves to be considered in my top 5, 20, or 15 or 20 or so top Star Trek characters of all time. I like him. He does a pretty good job with a fairly decent amount of this episode. I'll be mentioning specifics as I go, because I took a lot of notes. But I do want to say, I do want to give him some credit, because this is one of the first episodes that was really a Tom Paris episode that wasn't garbage. And, I just realized what I just said. Okay, this is the worst. Okay, yeah. My point is, Tom Paris hasn't had a lot of episodes to this point, and so McNeil really wanted to do something with this episode. And I think it shows in multiple scenes. Like I said, I'll be talking about him as we go, but I wanted to give the gentleman props. I also want to mention that there was actually, the showrunner won an Emmy for this episode, believe it or not. But it was for makeup. It was for outstanding makeup in a series, I believe. Yes, I wrote down the exact Emmy just to make sure I got it right. It was for the makeup on Paris as he was slowly mutating, because that's what was actually happening, into a salamander. If you haven't seen the episode, by the way, well, we'll talk about that in a minute. But either way, I wanted to give credit where credit is due. Now, I've actually been working on my prep for this episode for 2 days now. It's kind of hard to explain all the stuff that goes into these. I do spend a fairly large amount of time and effort onto these videos, believe it or not. And part of the problem there, though, and I have to be honest with you guys about this, before I started watching this episode about an hour ago, 5 hours before that, I was going to start watching the episode and then do this video. I wish I had. And I just kind of kept finding other things to do. I'd do the dishes, and I'd go work on the laundry, and I'd clean the kitchen, and then I'd go refill my water, and then I'd have some food, and then I'd start working on my Magase and Warcraft rule set, and then I'd got stuck doing this and chatting with this guy about these things, and I started doing some playtest math, and my point is I just kind of kept getting distracted and putting it off. And at least 3 times I was like, no, I'm going to watch Threshold. And then I'd just put it off again because I wanted to watch this episode so little. It's so funny because just coming off of Alliances, which I as another of those episodes I always skip, I had this feeling maybe Threshold wouldn't be as bad as I thought it was. Last thing I'm going to talk about before we really start talking about the episode finally. I've talked before about the differences between bad and all that fun stuff. And, just to reiterate very quickly and very briefly, there's bad, which, shrug. And then there's bad, which is so bad it's good, enjoyable bad. Pacific Rim is probably a pretty decent example of this. Incredibly awesome, movie that let's be honest with ourselves, was actually really bad. But it was bad because it was dumb. It's a specific type of bad. You can't really define a whole genre with the word bad. It's so generic. But you get my point, right? It's Last Action Hero, and it's another older movie that strikes me. It's just bad and stuff like that. Then there's so bad it just pisses you off. So bad it actually upsets you. So bad that it actually is a truly net negative to watch this, to actually deal with this, to have to interact with this. That's Threshold for me. It is a net negative. You'll notice the title is a little bit different than usual up there to reflect that. And usually I recommend people, watch these episodes and watch Voyager even, despite all its flaws. There's one episode I might recommend you go ahead and skip, and it is this one. If you still want to go for it, go ahead. Let's talk about the Tom subplot and the Michael Jonas story. Funny, I was just talking about this last week, or last episode rather. It hasn't actually been a week, actually it's been 2 days from my perspective. But let's talk about that subplot and why it should have not taken place around or on the Threshold thing. First of all, Tom's whole descent into, general hooliganry makes literally the opposite of sense compared to everything that happens in this episode, where one of the major themes is Tom has earned the respect of his people. Tom is trying to make a better person of himself, and Tom is trying to improve his lot in life, and is thankful for the life he now has. None of that really strikes me as Tom is a brutish, lazy, lackluster hooligan. I don't have a better word for it. Kind of a misstep, but there's another misstep, but I'll talk about that later. I just wanted to get that right off the top of my head. So, now let's talk about the teaser. Effective teasers. I know, I talk about this literally every episode. Bad teaser. Why? 2 reasons. 1, while the sound effects do actually a surprisingly decent job of conveying the general atmosphere of what's going on, number 1, the way this shot is telegraphed, it is very obvious they're in some kind of a simulation. There is no genuine sense of urgency or alarm. 2, which actually is I gotta re-emphasize this. Having a soundtrack and sound that is trying to emphasize the danger of a scene while everything else is de-emphasizing the danger of a scene is sending mixed signals in a bad way and just kind of undermines all the effectiveness of the scene. And point 2, I'm trying to make a shuttle go really, really fast is not an effective attention grabber. Let me make this clear. I am a Trekkie. No, that's a lie, actually. I'm a Trekker. And I really like Star Trek. And the idea of finding out if a shuttle can go really fast, to quote Nelix, is not what I would call very effective attention grabbing. So, bad teaser. So, let's recoup. 2 episodes ago, Prototype, the Enterprise, Voyagers got pasted by a bunch of robots. And then the previous episode, they tried and failed to make an alliance twice, and then are left stranded alone, but it's okay because they have Federation principles. Or maybe it was Starfleet principles. And either way, the tone of the last several episodes, and indeed some of the next ones coming up, is going to be, we're off, we're on our own, we're desperate, we've got a horrible situation, we need to be... You know what would be a great idea? Let's decide that now is the best time to go ahead and make an engine that can go to infinity. Doesn't that sound like a wonderful idea? Doesn't that sound joyously upriotous? Why now, of all times, is it that they've decided, okay, well, let's go ahead and go to infinity? No, not faster. We don't want to go faster, even though they actually do go faster in this episode, and that has practical applications, but let's just ignore that, because the only thing we care about is the goal line, and the goal line is in frickin' finity. I'll be talking about that concept more later, but I mean, really, I don't even know what to add to this, and I just got a text message. No! Oh, okay. That's unfortunate. My sister will be late coming home. That makes me sad. So now I'm sad about that and Threshold. Okay, so... Now, okay, you might be asking, why is it... We learned this later in the episode. Why is it that now, of all times, that they decide to do this? Now, there's 2 answers here. There's the there's the out-of-universe explanation, the in-universe explanation. The out-of-universe explanation is Rick Berman, because putting your episodes in some way that makes sense, or trying to have an actual thread of continuity, even setting continuity, not string continuity, but just setting continuity, is just too much for Rick Berman, who wishes to keep to the sacred precepts of Roddenberry, our Lord and Savior. And then the second problem, from an in-universe perspective, the reason they decided to do this now is because they found a new form of dilithium. And this dilithium is really efficient. And so that's the secret, that them to go infinite speed is a new form of dilithium that is more efficient. And that's why, the Dominion and the Borg and the... hell, I could literally name every advanced species in the series. Haven't figured this out yet. Because they didn't find that chunk of dilithium that Voyager happened across. I'm sorry, I gotta pause for a second. One of the... When I committed to doing my alternate versions of Voyager, which I have since abandoned, the Imperium version of Voyager, one of the biggest challenges to me was Threshold. Literally, I knew it was happening all the way back in Season 1. I was planning a whole story arc around fixing this one episode. I'm not going to tell you what I was going to do because it was long and complicated. But I was essentially going to pull a Twisted on it. If you saw my Twisted rumination, you know that I took the base core concept of the episode and basically just turned that into a whole new episode, right? Well, when I was doing that, when I was sitting down debating, thinking, planning, plotting, rethinking, rethinking, the very first idea that actually popped into my head was, okay, just have like the whole episode, and they achieve... warp 10, and then, I didn't know the best way to actually accomplish this, but for example, let's say that, and then the simulation ends, and then it's Barclay, original Barclay, back on Earth, and he has been playing this whole Voyager simulation, not as a way to get them home, not as, some kind of wish fulfillment or anything like that. He was literally just writing a story. He was writing a holo novel about how Voyager achieved Warp 10. And the last scene, the coda of it, was going to be Reginald sitting there thinking, and then they go everywhere in the universe simultaneously, and then they turn it back off and return home, and everyone's happy to see them, and life has changed forever. And he just kind of trails off for a moment, and then he thinks about it and says, nah. Computer delete program, and that would be, and then the screen would just go black like that when the beep goes by, and that would be the end of the episode. Yeah, I know it's kind of bad. So I like the fact that the very next thing they do is they convene in Nelix's place, which I'll talk about in a moment, and they start hashing out the problems they're having with making this work. Now, naturally, since this is a mathematical, theoretical impossibility, it is engineering problems that are actually getting in our way for making this happen. It is engineering difficulties that are preventing us from going infinite velocity. I mean, that just makes perfect sense, right? So, okay, there we go. So we've all we have to do is make a stronger hull, or make the nacelles not rip off, or torque off, which I'm not even going to get into how stupid that is. And then we've got it. We've solved the problem of the ages that nobody's been able to solve for a bagrillion years. Unless this is, again, a Mass Effect situation where every species that achieves Warp 10 just kind of goes and vanishes. And maybe actually that sounds a little bit more like a Master of Orion situation, but whatever. Let's just move on. Let's just move on. Did you know that Nelix is stupid and obstinate and rude? Comedy! No, it's not funny. Oh, that's right, it's not funny! Because every single time you grate it into our skulls, it goes completely contradictory towards our character development we already had of Nelix, little though it may be. It completely destroys our interest in seeing more of this character, and every time we see it, it makes us wonder why exactly is he interacting with this crew at this point. From an out-of-character and from an in-character perspective, it is a negative net impact. Why do you keep throwing this Nelix is an idiot crap down our throats? Oh, that's right. He's a bad cook, too. I forgot about that. That is Nelix's defining character trait. He's a bad cook, and he's an idiot. Right? Forgive me for getting upset about this point, but that happens 1, 2, 3, 4 times throughout the episode. 4 scenes in this episode basically hinge on Nelix is retarded. Oh, and he's a bad cook. Isn't that funny? It's funny. Laugh. God, please laugh, though, with me again if you don't laugh. And by they, I mean Rick Berman, of course. I'm sorry. I can accept that Nelix is not a brain genius. I'm not requiring him to be, like Harry Kim is, actually, or, or Spock, or anybody else who's super intelligent. But infinity is a concept we teach to children in school. If you want to go to virtually any college where mathematics are a required class for your degree, infinity is one of the most basic concepts they will cover. So what you are telling me is that Nelix is so stupid that he literally does not understand what infinite velocity means. However, in the interest of fairness, we switch to the other hand here. I should actually make it so, like, this is the hand when I'm speaking ill, and this is the hand when I'm speaking good. What do you think? No? On the other hand, except this is the same hand, maybe what they're saying is Nelix is so smart, he is dumbfounded by the very concept of infinite velocity, as anyone with a brain would, and says, oh, wait, that's incredibly stupid, and his brain just kind of breaks, and that hurt like hell. And from then on, he's just, acting stupid because he's literally in reboot mode, The whole rest of the episode is Nelix metaphorically singing Daisy. I don't know, I just think that would make more sense. Let's move on. So, here's an interesting question that occurred to me at about this point. They keep doing these simulations. They keep hopping on the holodeck, and on the holodeck, simulating the shuttle going warp 10 and what would happen to the nacelles and what would happen with the engines and all that fun stuff. I have a fascinating question for you. And I apologize for hitting my mic just now. Oh, wrong hand. Fascinating question. How exactly do you simulate something that's impossible? I'm just curious. Do you just randomly plug in variables and then the computer says error? Or okay, I know this may not make a lot of sense, but let me just lay this out here, okay? What they are essentially asking the computer to do repeatedly and at great depth and length is divide by zero. Over and over and over and over again. Why are they treating any of the data they're getting from this divide by zero problem as valid? And not only valid, but actual fact. In fact, it's actually hilarious because they literally go 3 scenes between the holodeck test flight, which succeeds, and the actual test flight, which succeeds. I guess I shouldn't be in that sand yet. Now, if that doesn't sound ludicrous, I know this is Star Trek. I know we're limited. I know we can't be realistic. But honestly, you want to break one of the fundamental laws of reality and do it in an afternoon? From theory to practical application? Really? Now, before we get to some good stuff, I do want to talk about something real quick. I know not a lot of people really get into math or physics or anything like that, like I do, for example, or a couple of my friends do. I've thought long and hard if there's a really good way to summarize why the very concept of going infinite velocity is ludicrously stupid. And I don't mean to sound like I'm insulting your intelligence. I imagine most of you out there, just by saying infinite velocity, your first response is going to be basically a facepalm. But just to try and explain it as simply as I can, the idea here is the problem with the fact that infinity is, as a factual number, is something we can conceptualize under the idea that it never ends. For example, infinite space, infinite mass, infinite energy. All of these things we as human beings can wrap our minds around quickly and easily, because the idea is just that no matter how much you keep, having, there's more of it, okay? And that's a decent application, and indeed it is an actual application of the word infinity. Or infinite, or however you want to say that. Infinite velocity. I'm sorry, I really got to say this right. Accelerating to infinite velocity, which really puts the number on it. The idea here is now that instead of having an infinite expanse of ever, never ending, always continuing forever, and I want to stress that because that is what infinite means, forever. Never ending, never stopping, never ceasing. Imagine that your speed is infinite. Now, if your mind just broke, don't feel bad. Again, you just had the Nelix problem, and now you're going to seeing Daisy for the next hour. But with all seriousness, the problem here is that that very concept is so contradictory to everything we understand about everything, about base reality. Okay. Faster than light speed is something that is a mathematical possibility in real life. And every form of fiction since that has introduced FTL drive has done it in a way to try and explain how they break that mathematical barrier. And in just about every case, there's either something they do to basically cheat, wormholes are a good example, just to use one, or they discover that their knowledge about science was incorrect in some way. That is how science progresses. We find out that we were wrong, we correct, and then we move on. I mean, literally, that is basically scientific progression in a nutshell. But the problem here is this is not trying to change one simple rule or law. This is not the idea that we are going faster than light, and the E equals mc squared equation does or does not apply here, okay? This is changing everything, challenging and breaking every way we think about everything fundamentally. And that is also true in Star Trek, because Star Trek itself also established and enforced this mindset. One of the things they did when they introduced the warp scale was they made it like this. I'll just visualize here, okay? So warp 1 here is actually the speed of light. Warp 1, speed of light, right? Warp 2, however, is not twice the speed of light. It's, I forget the exact number, but it's, and then warp 3 and warp 4 and 5, etc. And so when you get up to warp 9, you are going way, way, way faster compared to warp 8 than warp 8 is 0.7, or to warp 7. Makes sense, right? The reason they did this was they wanted to have an artificial cap on the overall speed. It was done for good reasons, is what I'm going to say. They did it so that the series would have a degree of grounding. The setting would have a degree of grounding behind it so that, the writers wouldn't be tempted to go do ludicrously impossible things. And of course some of them did anyways, where no one has gone before comes to mind. But whatever. The point being, going warp 9 is going really, really fast. Going warp 9.1 is going much, much faster. The idea was it capped out at 10. but even that is actually a theoretical, because again, warp 10 would be the idea that you were going infinite velocity. Now, they say this throughout the episode, that theoretically, and I want to stress that theoretically part, the idea is if you're going warp 10, you're occupying all points in the universe, not the galaxy, the universe simultaneously. And I have to admit that actually makes a degree of sense, and I'll talk about this more later. And within the setting, I can accept that, especially as a theoretical that's never actually going to be accomplished outside of magic or the Q or whatever. We can accept Q doing something like that. The crew of Voyager, by themselves, with no backup and a new form of dilithium pulling that off, is beyond ludicrous. Now, I'm sorry, I kind of segued here because I realized in like mid-speech I didn't actually want to go into the math and physics and really start boring you. Let's just move on. Right. Switch over to this hand, because this is actually a good thing. Tom talking about his ambition, talking about his designs as a child, talking about, people always thought Tom Paris, he's going to accomplish something, but he never actually did. That was actually good. I liked that. I liked the way they presented that. I liked McNeil's performance. I liked his interaction with Janeway. Yes. However, the problem here is that as we were going through this scene, a number of really big problems came up. First is the one I already mentioned. Why is this Tom Paris, the one who really wants to make something of himself, going to turn into a hooligan over the next couple of episodes? Now, okay, those of you who are spoiler alerting, spoiler alert. Yes, I know it's a thing. I know it's a part of the plan. I get that. I understand that. I've seen these episodes. My point is, if you were trying to add any sort of mystery or intrigue or otherwise interest in this setup to us, the viewers, you just failed, because all you've been doing is, for the previous 2 episodes, I might add, is emphasize, actually, previous, 30 episodes, is emphasize how Tom Paris is awesome and ambitious, and he's flawed and he's human and he's engaging. You're shooting yourselves in the foot, Voyager. While I'm on this hand, Tom, okay. As a writer, when you have a scene in an episode or whatever, especially in a TV series because you have limited runtime, you need to have every scene mean something, okay? That's just my opinion, admittedly, but it's opinion shared by most people that I know who are good at that kind of thing. Good directors, good writers, that sort of thing. So the idea here is that if we're going to have a scene, it's not filler. It's not padding. It's servicing the character. It's servicing the setting. It's servicing the plot. It's servicing the B-plot. It's adding some flavor or scope to things, something. It is adding something to our enjoyment and to the franchise as a whole, to the setting. Speaking as a writer, the scene where Janeway goes to visit Tom does accomplish this because it shows us a bit of Tom Paris. However, the reason she goes there is to tell Tom that he can't go because he has, and I quote, an enzymatic imbalance in his cerebellum. You do not drop something like that as a writer unless it means something. Now you may say, well, isn't that referenced back later in the episode? To which I applaud you, because I didn't actually remember that. It wasn't until I just rewatched this that I actually noticed that there was literally one line, well, 2 lines. The Janeway asked the doctor, is it because of the imbalance? The doctor says, no. That's it. That's all. It is literally name-dropped and then forgotten. And has no relevance to anything. Why even have that? Why even mention that? It completely robs so much of the scene. Not as much so as the next thing, though, because the next thing that happens is, and I quote, Janeway says, he can't predict what will happen. And then, literally, the next sentence, she says, he gives a 2%, I'm not quoting, but she says he has given a 2% chance that, well, she doesn't say, because he can't predict what will happen, but there's a 2% chance of it happening. How exactly? See, I just feel like the Voyager computers and whatnot in this whole episode were just running on magic spontaneously. Not only were the holodecks able to simulate something that is theoretically fundamentally impossible, but then the Doctor is able to put actual exact percentile odds on something that is theoretically fundamentally impossible. Oh, I'm sorry, and the interactions of a human being with something. You get the point. And that just robs any of the drama and interest of the scene. However, I want to end on a good point. And I quote Tom Paris: "This is the first time in 10 years I feel I have a life to risk." Good line. Props, Brown and Braga. Good line. And McNeil delivers it very well. I like that because, in my opinion, that's where Tom Paris's arc should have, and indeed eventually does, go. The man who has screwed up, but not for want of trying. And now he has been given a chance, like a fifth chance, give or take, and he's making something of it. He's not perfect, he's not smooth, he's not fluid, he's not great, he's got flaws, he's got issues, he's got problems, but he is extremely human, and he is trying. I've talked about this before. This is the difference between Grom Hellscream and Garrosh Hellscream. Both of them had their problems, both of them had their bloodlust, both of them had their issues. Grom was trying. Garrosh was not. I actually made a note here I just forgot about. I realized as I was writing this, I figured it out. What the doctor was actually doing was he's got a big dartboard, right? And it's just got, it's a 10 by 10 grid, and he's got all 100 numbers on there, and he'll just throw a dart at it, punk, and wherever it lands, that's the percentage he'll just put, how, it's actually in his mind, because, hologram computer, but, he's like, okay, I say a 2% chance that this will happen. Hang on, what do you think about this? Looks like a 33% chance, I'd say, give or take. I could run the numbers again if you want. Oh, I'm sorry, 78% chance. Huh? Yeah, I just ran the numbers again. Page 2. So, you may have already, in watching this, you probably assumed that one of my biggest problems with this episode is the fact that they shattered all everything. There's a word. Hang on, give me just a moment. Goodwill. They've shattered all viewer goodwill by completely destroying this, a fundamental bedrock of the setting, right? And you would be partially correct. That is one of the things that bothers me about this episode. I took a note here of the exact point in time at which that is broken. 12 minutes and 15 seconds into the episode. 12 minutes and 15 seconds. They go from the very beginning holodeck simulation to successfully going warp 10 and achieving infinite velocity. Which, God, every time I say that, it just kind of breaks my brain a little bit. And so, that's bad, but would it surprise you to learn that that's the B-plot? Now, if you don't know what that means, allow me to elaborate. The B-plot is the secondary, less important plot that either serves as congruence in a proper episode, or backdrop in a mediocre episode, or irrelevance in a bad episode, to the A-plot. Let me say that again. The Voyager crew creates a shuttle that can go anywhere in the universe, all at the same time, in the first act, as a... God, I can't... As a throwaway to what the episode is actually about. The word threshold in this, I've read a lot of Brandon Braga's thing about this, actually. The word threshold actually doesn't really refer to the warp threshold, it refers to the evolution threshold. And he had this whole thing, am I going to actually, hang on. Let's go ahead and not talk about that now. I made a note of that, and I'll talk to it when I get there, so let's just move on. But seriously, that's like in Star Wars, as if suddenly saying the Force is made of midichlorians and having it be irrelevant. Oh, wait. Anyways. Also, I gotta say here, Rick Berman fired, I can't think of his name, and I do feel bad about that, but it was the gentleman who did the music in seasons 1, 2, and 3 of The Next Generation. Brilliant, amazing composer. There are many episodes of early TNG that were otherwise bad, that were salvaged or accented or otherwise made brilliant by his music. And if you wonder what I'm talking about, go look up The Best of Both Worlds sometime, and you will hear his music. Rick Berman fired him and started giving us what started off okay, but basically turned into very generic elevator music, It was there but it was completely ignorable. In almost no situation did it actually fit or add to the scene. You literally could have removed it, and it would have had about the same impact. And that's bad. But nowhere is that worse than in Voyager. They're achieving something that should be great, wonderful, should be impacting, should have lasting repercussions throughout the entire setting. And the music that plays for it is so damned generic. I actually was making a note, it's kind of crossed off here, you can't see it, that there was no music in this scene. And then I paused and realized there was. It was just so elevator that I didn't even hear it. And I had to rewind and be like, oh, there was music there. Also, while we're still on this scene, I just made a note here called accelerating to infinite, because that makes lots of sense. I'm not going to rehash the math. I'm not going to rehash the physics. Just think about that. Accelerating up to infinite speed. Also, here's something that'll come up a couple more times throughout this episode. In this episode, more than once, they have said infinite velocity means everywhere at once. I'm summarizing, but you get the point. That is not something that's new. That's not something you had to have been a Trekker or a Trekkie or a geek or a nerd or whatever in order to know. They mention it in this episode more than once. So this is established within the confines of just this one episode. Even if you threw continuity out the window, which, hey, let's be honest with ourselves, we'd kind of like to for this episode, you still have that problem. So why then is it that everyone acts so surprised when Tom just somehow disappears? It's so strange. It's like he's occupying everywhere in the universe at the same time. But no one's going to say that. No one in that whole section is going to say that. They're going to run around and be like, oh, I'm boost sensors to maximum. Try to find him. He's nowhere within 6 parsecs. Oh my god, this is totally a shock for some frickin' reason. Really, guys? And the best part is, I could almost excuse it for reasons I'll go into pretty much at the end when we get to the changes idea. If, he wasn't going infinite velocity, if he was just going really, really, really fast, okay, I'm with that, all right. Yeah, understood. But then, after this point, they continue to reassert he was everywhere. He saw everything. They just keep slamming this point into our faces so that we can't escape the fact that they're stupid beyond words for being so confused about the situation. And this will show up again towards the end of the episode when they go to Warp 10 again. In a shuttle. There's a novel called Vendetta by Peter David. It's not one of his best, I'll be honest with you. It's interesting, it's engaging in its own right. It's very dark. It's actually probably one of the darkest novels I've ever seen him write. And it's about the Borg, so I guess that makes sense. And it's basically his personal interpretation of the Borg. At the time, they weren't very well defined. And as I've mentioned before, well, actually, I guess I haven't. Continuity is kind of weird among Star Trek. Some things are, some things aren't. Pretty much all the books have absolutely nothing to do with continuity, so they're allowed to do whatever they feel like. Some novels will actually keep to their own continuity. There's actually quite a few that have been doing this in recent times as well. They're still going to. Where the authors will collaborate with each other and ensure that, this particular timeline is congruent and they actually have string continuity over there. But for the most part, they don't have to pay attention to anything with regards. So he was allowed to do whatever he wanted with the Borg, is what I'm trying to say. But the interesting thing is, the main plot was actually focused on a woman whose name I can't actually think of right now, who had found the actual Doomsday device, not the prototype. And at the very end of the novel, she goes Warp 10. Why do I mention this? Because Peter David did a much, much, much more accurate, interesting, and engaging explanation and examination of what that would mean than, the actual creators of the show did. The actual creators of Star Trek did. And this is exactly what I meant earlier, about killing the goodwill of your viewers. If you have some god machine that can, under extreme duress, achieve Warp 10, and then have to suffer the consequences of that effect, the viewer, me in this case, is much more willing to go with that. what actually happened made perfect sense to me. See, she basically got. It's actually really hard to explain because, again, this is theoretical physics. But the idea here, it's the halfway theory. To put it in the simplest possible way I can. And if I don't know the actual name of the theory, forgive me. I'm bad on names. If you go halfway towards something infinitely, no matter how long you travel, literally, if you infinitely travel for the rest of all of eternity, you will never get there, ever. Ever. Try to think about that for a moment. It's an interesting thought in its own right. But that's also similarly related to the concept of what we think, again, theoretical physics, might happen if you cross the event horizon of a particular black hole or something like that. The point at which theoretical physics breaks down, right, of what we understand of theoretical physics because of the pull, because of that infinite pull, right? That's what happens to her. She goes to warp 10, and she is smeared everywhere. All at once, simultaneously, just like everyone always said it would. But from her perception, basically the next, 20 seconds or so of her life are the only 20 seconds of her life she ever experiences. And the way he does this in book format is wonderful. It's like, it's a whole paragraph as she's like, oh, Picard is gone, but that's okay. It won't be long now. She'll be at her destination soon. Just a few seconds. I'm summarizing. Just a few seconds. And then it cuts away to something else. And then it cuts back to her, and it's the exact same paragraph. And then it cuts away, and it cuts to her same paragraph. And the very, very, very last page of the book is that paragraph. And then, like, if you could picture this, written here. And then as it's going down, there's the paragraph, and then there's about half the paragraph, and it's kind of cut off to the right. And then there's about a third of the paragraph, and then so forth, until it's just like one line and then one word, and then it just trails off forever. That got across the point beautifully, and really emphasized, I think, personally, what would actually happen if someone were to accomplish this theoretically impossible act. And I was with it as a viewer and as a fan because it made sense and was consistent. I just felt like bringing that up because what they do in this episode, this is ludicrous. I don't believe this. I can't. So Tom goes to infinite velocity and then comes back from infinite velocity. And if you're paying attention, yes, that makes exactly as little sense as going infinite velocity to begin with. He turns his engines off, and then he's right back there at Voyager. Yes, really. Yes, he's right back there with Voyager. After being everywhere in the entire universe simultaneously, he ended up right there. I know this is a hard concept to wrap your mind around, but try to think of the fact that space is big. And I'm not going to quote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy here, but seriously, space is big, okay? The mathematical odds of you ending up in one specific spot the size of a spaceship in one solar system, if you were to land anywhere within a single solar system, are so huge, I don't even feel like actually doing this and actually giving you the numbers for this. Now, emphasize that by a factor of a few hundred quadrillion. Yes, I'm not using real numbers because I don't feel like it at this point. And then you've got a galaxy, one galaxy. And then there's the massive, absolutely gargantuan expanses in between the galaxies. And then you get where I'm going with this. Because I have like 6 more steps before I actually get out to the universal level. And he ends up right next to Voyager. Oh, because he did it on purpose. Right, because you can control infinite freaking velocity. Right? God, this episode's going to give me an aneurysm. Oh my god. And then so first of all, I just got to comment on I actually made a note of this, so I have to comment on it. Tom is recounting his experiences going infinite frickin' speed, and he says my velocity indicator indicated warp 10. I got to say bravo to the Starfleet engineers who said, you know what, on this Type 2 shuttle that's designed to go about warp 6 on average, yes, I am a geek, we should make an indicator that shows not only that it can go any speed on the scale, but actually just in case someone completely destroys our fundamental understanding of reality, and we should program this shuttle to somehow have the capacity to sense that the fundamental understanding of reality has been destroyed, and therefore conclude, based on that circumstance, that it is going warp 10, and then display it in a simple, nondescript way. I know, I'm reaching here, I'm reading in it, but that's what I do. You know that. I ruminate, I look into the depths, and the more I look at this episode, the more it destroys my brain. I feel like it's a cancer eating my brain from the inside out. This episode is so stupid on so many levels. I'm not even halfway through this. Let's keep talking, shall we? Let's talk about how Tom is talking about, I was everywhere. And naturally, being everywhere, I saw the crew, and I saw this ship, and I saw the inside of the ship. Whoa. And then I saw the Klingons. I love how that's one of the random things he throws out. He throws like three things out. You know, I saw the Klingons, and I saw it back home, and I saw other galaxies. I love the summarization there. I saw the ship, and the inside of the ship, and the crew, and the Klingons, and home, and other galaxies. I love the progression there. But here's the ultimate flaw with this. Why does time function in any linear matter when you're going infinite speed? Now, granted, we're in impossibly theoretical things within a fictional universe, but seriously, bear with me here. How exactly... Because, okay. Why are you so upset, Arshia and Gaia? Oh, that's a good question. Good question. Bob! No? No Bobs out there? Damn. If there's any Bobs, throw in the comment. That'd really amuse me. Why does this bother me so much? I've talked about this before in brief and at length on my streams, but the bottom line comes down to the fact that a show does not have to be realistic to be enjoyable. However, I personally enjoy it when a show is believable. And believability comes down to two things. Not stretching the credulity of the viewers too far based on what is actually possible here in real life, and two, keeping consistent with your own rules and mindsets. There's actually a trope for this. I can't remember the name of it. It's like magic is, or something like that. The idea here is that, you know, if you think about it, magic should not have to follow any rules. And yet in most forms of fiction, magic does follow a very strict set of rules. And in many cases, those rules are well confined and well kept within its own setting. Another good example of this, for the most part, is actually Star Wars. The way hyperspace works, the way the Force works, the way repulsor fields work, all this stuff is fairly well established and tends to work within confines of itself. And therefore it is believable because it is consistent and because it does not stretch our believability too far. You follow? Babylon 5 is probably what I would say one of the most believable science fiction works I've seen in a long time. As far as television shows and stuff like that go. And one of the reasons I say that is because they actually had a team, along with JMS himself, whose only jobs were maintaining that, were keeping true to that and making notes of that and that kind of thing. And JMS himself outlined a lot of that when he put out the series Bible back when he was still pitching the series. I like that. And among other reasons, I like it because it shows the work you're willing to put into it. It shows you actually care to some extent or another, because you're actually willing to sit down and do the work in making your setting make sense, rather than just doing whatever for the sake of the story. Star Trek is not exactly the most contiguous setting there is. They break their own rules kind of often, even in the good shows, even in Deep Space Nine, even in TNG. They still break their own rules semi-often, but for the most part, those are the exceptions. This is something so incongruent, so violently against so many precepts of the show, that it's beyond aggravating, and that's why it upsets me so much. It would be like if in the middle of Breaking Bad, I know, bad example, because I haven't actually watched the show at length, but bear with me. I'm going to try to make this analogy work, because I swore I was going to make a modern show analogy work with this. It'd be like in Breaking Bad if the main character, Walter, is going along, and all of a sudden he reaches into a thing of bushes and pulls out a bunch of roots. And then he's like, what's that? Well, these roots, when ground down, form crystal meth. And everyone acts like this is completely normal, like he's a visionary for having discovered this. And then the next episode, this is forgotten completely. Actually, I'm underselling it, as weird as that sounds. I did the crystal meth thing because I know that's kind of the primary point of the show, but let me do a better one here, okay? Because I think this will be more appropriate. Let's see, he finds these roots and he says, these roots are the unobtainium roots, or whatever. You know, the Terramachadian roots. What are these? Well, you know, if you grind these up, these will cure all forms of cancer. Oh, perfect! And then he cures cancer! And then it's never mentioned again in the entire history of the show. Never alluded to, never referenced. And it's also really poorly written and really poorly directed and partially well acted. You get the point I'm trying to get across. That's why this upsets me. If you'll forgive me for segueing even further, because this is actually a topic I feel that does need to be discussed. Every now and again I'll have someone say, why do you get so upset over a TV show? Or why do you get so upset over a movie or a book or a game or whatever? Why does it, and every time I get this question, I know that it's being asked out of ignorance, so I don't actually harbor any ill feelings to the person asking it. And depending on who that person is, I may or may not try to actually explain myself in the situation. But let me just lay it out for you, my faithful viewers. I hope. Are any of you still watching this? That'd be great if you are. We as human beings care about things. I know. This is just a shocking revelation, but bear with me, I'm going somewhere with this. We as human beings care about something. What we care about literally varies from individual to individual. I don't think you can point to any two individuals on the entire planet and say that they have the exact same caring, right? That being said, a lot of us tend to care about similar types of things in general, right? In generic. Nothing wrong with that. Something that what is defined as what you care about is basically something only you can define. That's the other interesting fact about this. I can't say, well, you're a class 73 blankety blankety blank, and therefore you're going to care about these kinds of things. I could try to guess, or I could try to, again, apply generics or general concepts, but that's not going to actually get to the point of the matter, and even then it still has the possibility of being wrong, because the only one who can actually decide what you care about is you, right? Now, one thing I can say generally is a lot of people care about entertainment. Let me say this point as absolutely bluntly as I can, because it pisses me off. I detest the mindset that just because something I care about is a form of entertainment, is something to improve the quality of my life, and is therefore not required for my continued survival, that makes it unimportant. That kind of mindset pisses me off. Now, if you have that mindset, but you're willing to meet me halfway by simply saying we can agree to disagree, or whatever, that's fine. But the other 99% of the time, I see someone with that mindset, and they are preachy. And they like to get right up in your face and say, why do you care about this? It's not something you need. You don't require that. It's not important like, a job is, or money is, or food is. How dare you get upset about something like that? How dare you care about something like that? No, I violently disagree with that assessment. And that's all I'm going to say about that matter. But the problem is, those people are actually also wrong, provably because they also care about things. Things that are not required for survival. I'm going to use two generic examples. I am generalizing, I apologize, I'm not trying to call out anybody, but I have seen these two examples happen in real life, and that's why I'm using them, okay? I knew a guy who was really into sports. His favorite team was the Steelers from Pennsylvania, football, American football. And so that was his favorite team. He was really into it. He watched every single one of their games. He derived enjoyment in his life from that. And you know what? I am absolutely awesomed by that. I think that's great. One time I saw that man actually punch a hole through his wall because the Steelers lost a game. Now, I didn't question him or talk down to him or make fun of him or anything, because as weird as this is going to sound, I understood. I didn't agree. There's a degree of self-control and moderation involved here. But my point is, I got it. Fast forward a few months. I was playing Neverwinter Nights 2, which could date this example. And I get to the ending of Neverwinter Nights 2 where, spoiler alert, the ending was utter garbage. It's literally rocks fall, everyone dies. And I do mean literally, like the place you're in collapses and the rocks fall and your whole party dies, and that's the end of the game. What is otherwise a pretty damn good game, I'd say. That pissed me off. I didn't put any holes in any walls, but it pissed me off, and I was ranting at it to him. And he looks at me with the most condescending look and this attitude. He was just like, what is wrong with you, getting all upset over a damn video game? Why don't you grow up a little? Now you see the problem here, right? Let me give you the second example. I had a gentleman who had some issues with his car. Now, he really liked this car. It was an old 76... Oh, God, I can literally picture it. Vet. It was a Vet. It was a 76 Corvette, okay? I think. I may still be getting that wrong. If I saw a picture of it, I could show it to you. But anyways, it was a really nice car, and he put a lot of work and effort into fixing it. And when something would go wrong with it, this is a repeated example, and I don't have a specific incident. When something would go wrong, he would get really pissed off. He would get really upset. And it reached the point where he started to have, he would intentionally go out and just vent for a while because he was so aggravated at it. Now, it is worth noting he did actually use this car in order to, function every day, get to work, and that kind of thing, which of course has its own entailed risks, but whatever, I just mentioned it because it's relevant to what's coming. In my case, what ended up happening was actually related to a game called Asheron's Call, which will also date this particular example. And as I was playing that game, long story short, I lost a Verendi Inquisitor mask due to being PvP'd because I was flagged red for a certain quest, and there happened to be people there at that quest ready to gank you and steal your stuff. And I literally had one too few DIs, death items, in order to cover it. I was rather upset about that. The guy made so much fun of me he didn't let it go for about a week. And when I've tried to talk to him back about it, any argument I made he immediately shut down because, well, I need that car. I need that car in order to get to work and back. I need that car in order to do this, or, whatever. And I would try to use another example. No, you don't understand. He would just constantly try to shut me down on this matter. Because I've seen a lot of people do that kind of thing, where they aren't willing to accept that some types of situations apply in more than one type of situation. Now, where am I going with all this? What I am going with all this is actually admittedly kind of defensive in its own right. But that's just because I'm trying to meet the people halfway, as weird as that sounds. You know me, I try to communicate, I try to bond, try to understand. And I just know there's going to be people out there who are like, why are you getting so pissed off about this episode, Arsh? Well, I've already given you my answer. This is something I cared about. This is something that mattered to me. Star Trek's been a part of my life since I was born. Literally. I used to watch the original series with my mom. I watched TNG when it came out. I have a lot of good memories with Star Trek. That's something I care about. And again, like with the Mass Effect thing, why did I care that Mass Effect 3 punched me in the balls? Because I cared to begin with. I get upset about this episode because this episode spits in my face. This is like the equivalent of that. This isn't just the car breaking down. This is the car getting up and punching you in the balls over and over. Boom, boom, like in Casino Royale, except there was a rope involved. But you get the point. And I just felt like explaining that because I know that some of my viewers out there are going to be like, "What in the world is up with you, Arsh?" Let's move on. Tom Paris. The rest of this episode, there's a scene with B'Elanna as well, where she's talking and engineering and they're discussing stuff. But there's several scenes in this episode after Tom Paris gets back where they continue to emphasize the infinite nature of it, appropriately, theoretically speaking, everywhere, simultaneously, all that fun stuff. And then literally contradict themselves within a single sentence by explaining something that would not happen under those circumstances. Can I give a specific example? Yes, I can. How exactly did the sensors of the shuttle manage to record the data on just this one sector, down to the cubic millimeter, I believe they mentioned, within the episode, in perfect detail, while going infinite speed? How did the sensors... You see, the problem here is, if you don't really get it, I'll just lay it out flat. The sensors would have to be also functioning infinitely fast in order to infinitely process all the infinite data coming in. No matter how you look at it, it doesn't make sense. You could literally say Q snapped. And that's another question. Why does it have so few... I forget the exact number, forgive me, but they say it's like 80 gigaquads or something like that, which is not a lot of data. That's actually about the same amount of size that... no, actually, it's smaller, apologies, than the Doctor himself is, based on the show's own science and numbers. Really? Infinite data down to the frickin' cubic millimeter is less information than in the Doctor? Now, I have a note here. That note is in all caps, and that note says Nelix. Nelix! He's dumb, and he cooks bad. Moving on. So, okay, no, I'm sorry, I can't move on because this is what the episode refuses to do. Nelix shows up and says, I've made this, this brand new coffee named after you. And then Tom acts incredibly, like a dick, to be a little bit blunt towards him. And Nelix rushes off, feeling, rather hurt and rude by this. And then Tom takes a swig of the coffee and then says to B'Elanna, and I'm going to try and quote this as close to words as I can, seriously, don't drink it. You're putting your life in your hands there. Because, Nelix's cooking is just that bad. And then they get to the frickin' sickbay after Tom collapses from having an allergic reaction to water. I'll talk about that in a moment. And then they say, what happened? Oh my god, he drank Nelix's coffee. And then the doctor looks up and says with a totally serious tone, it's amazing he's still alive. Yes, we get it! Nelix dumb! Nelix bad cook! We get it! Stop drilling it into my brain! It stopped being funny a season ago. I'd like to mention something really quick here. Arguably, based on the actions that Tom Paris made happen here, arguably, I say, for reasons I'll go into in a moment, you could say that Tom Paris is a hero, is a historical figure for this. I find that very ironic. And the reason why I find it ironic is a lot of people, including some of the staff of Voyager themselves, have basically ruled this episode non-continuity, as in Threshold never actually happened. There's actually two big reasons for that, as far as evidence, which I'm not going to go. I'm not going to cover. I don't feel the need for it, because I agree this episode shouldn't be continuity. And that's all I'm going to say about that subject. So, moving on. Veiny foreheads. One thing I've always found fascinating is that in Star Trek, one of the crucial signs, this has been true for a while, that you are screwed, medically speaking or whatever, is if you get veins on your forehead, right? I've always kind of wondered why that is. I mean, I know from an out-of-character perspective, I know that's because, it's an easy prop to apply, and it's a good visual sign. It's immediate, something's wrong, is really all it's trying to convey. But it applies in so many situations, it just always finds it amusing. And you may ask, why are you even nitpicking this little thing, Arsh? To which I respond, well, I've already actually answered you this in a previous rumination about Voyager. If you're using something that's a cliche or whatnot, and it's in a decent episode or a mediocre episode or a good episode, I'm not really going to mind as much, especially if you employ it properly. If you do it and it's literally just a way to segue in, it's literally just a way to say, oh my god, he's screwed, and then segue into the A plot, which we haven't even reached yet, by the way, then yeah, I'm not going to notice and it's bothering. Speaking of which, did I write it down? I did, I think. It's on the next page. No, wait, hang on. I know I wrote it down somewhere. Oh, never mind. I guess I didn't, because it's about halfway through. Oh, no, there it is, right there. 19 minutes and 8 seconds into this episode, which is just a little bit under halfway into this episode, is when the A-plot actually starts. Now, I'm big on, pacing. I've talked about that before. I defend Kingdom Hearts 2 and Final Fantasy VII, to use two examples. I'm with that. But 19 minutes into this episode is when the A-plot starts. No foreshadowing, no development, no build-up, nothing. 1908 is the moment at which it starts being foreshadowed. In other words, the scene I've been talking about for like 10 minutes now. Really? Oh, by the way, Nelix! He's so bad and stupid at cooking. Everything he does is okay, I can't do that anymore. That hurts like hell. But that's the last point. That's the last time I'll bring it up, because that's the last time the episode will bring it up. I swear. So, Braun and Braga wrote an episode called Genesis back in TNG. If you don't remember that episode, well, I don't blame you. Despite having Reginald Barclay in it, which, let's be honest, Reginald Barclay is awesome, was a really, really bad episode. Because, literally, the episode, Sci-Fi Debris did a video of it, and at one point he decided to summarize it by doing a little song and dance tune called, the crew is de-evolving, dark corridors, Da, 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 da. Dark corridors, because that was the whole episode. They're de-evolving and dark corridors. It was pretty bad. No offense, Braga. The problem is this is that same ludicrous concept and for the same ludicrous reasons. Now let's be clear. When we get down to biology, most people, myself included, are willing to be a little bit more lenient than we are about more hard technology, like everything I was talking about with the Warp 10 thing. That's math, that's physics, whatever. Biology is a little bit different because it varies from setting to setting. What humans are, after all, is different in Star Trek than what humans are here. Because, if absolutely for no other reason, the creators can say humans are this. That's one of the powers you have as a writer, as a creator of a fictional setting. You can say, this is true. Here in real life, we don't have that authority. We don't have that capacity. We still don't know anything, if you really think about it. But in a fictional setting, you can say, this is true. So, when you decide as a creator to say, well, now this is true, I'm a little more willing to go with it, okay? However, not only is this the same ludicrous concept he approached back in Genesis, but it's actually just as badly implemented. Because, well, I don't know how to put this, so I'm just going to say this as bluntly as I can, okay? We are not Pokemon! Okay? I know, it's confusing. We look just like them, but I know. Just trust me. We're not freaking Pokemon, okay? Oh my god, this isn't even something that's unique to these two episodes. You swear, you mix up the DNA and bam! Dong, 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 and then everything starts swirling around, depending on which game you're playing. And it's swirling. I've been playing Black and White one recently, and then it comes back, and then ding, ling, ling, ling! Congrats! Your William Riker has evolved into a frickin' ape man, or in this case, Tom Paris has evolved into a salamander. Yes, really. No! Alright, so, that being said, I want to actually keep talking about this for just a moment, because here's the interesting thing. Brandon Braga originally started this episode with a concept. I said I'd talk about this later. The idea, he felt it was a mentally interesting idea. This is, again, Braga's mindset, his writing strength in a nutshell. Stream of consciousness stuff, things that don't actually make sense, things that have an element of mystery to them. I've talked about this before. So his idea here was the thought that what would it be like if we found out that we don't always evolve forward, that sometimes we evolve backwards as well. Now I have to be honest, that sounds ludicrous and stupid for a host of reasons that I don't feel like going over in the same depth that I did about the physics thing, because I know evolution is a taught topic, so I'm just going to completely leave that alone and kick it out the window. It's still stupid. If they had used the word mutate instead of evolve, weirdly enough, I'd be a lot more kindly inclined towards it. But here's the problem. Even other things that use evolution to radically and violently change the nature of a biological being into another biological being tend to be self-consistent about it and tend to always advance forward. Because that's kind of what evolution actually means when you break down the nature of the word. And if you think I'm being facetious, I want to point out again Pokemon, because Pokemon is more consistent and has that forward movement thing, whereas this episode does not. Now, you may be asking where I'm getting this from. This is actually behind the scenes stuff, because Braga had to cut basically an entire chunk of the latter half of the episode for various reasons, which cut out the entire premise, which was what I just told you about, the idea that we sometimes revert and then in addition to going forward. But yeah, that's basically all I have to say on it. And I just want to say a lot of this episode really does have his fingerprints all over it, in a good and a bad way too. When Paris first falls over, with the veiny foreheads, I gotta be honest with you, when I first watched this episode, my first reaction was actually interest. I mean, nothing against Tom Paris, but up until that point, the episode had just been, kicking me in the balls over and over and over with its everything. And then all of a sudden, it started doing something interesting. And I was like, oh. And that is, Brandon Braga is actually pretty good at catching the attention of the audience, or at least me specifically and most people I know. He can do that kind of thing. He just has to be going somewhere with it. Speaking of which, let's talk about Tom Paris. Let's talk about Duncan McNeil's excellent, this is a positive, excellent acting experience in this. He, while he is de-evolving, there's this wonderful scene where he's talking with Janeway. Actually, no, we're going to actually rewind because there's two scenes I really want to talk about. One is when he's lying there dying. I know, we'll talk about the death in a moment. Bear with me. Um, he's lying there dying, and he's talking about pizza and how much he wants pizza, and oh god, and I just don't trust people who don't cry. And do you ever cry? You should cry. You know, when I was young, my best memories are when I was crying back in thing, and oh, I loved that room. I used to just lock the door and do all this stuff. I lost my virginity in the room, and he just keeps going on and going on like that. It's actually really appropriate. I know it probably seems a little irritating, but speaking as someone who has both been with and been someone who is in a massive, let's just call it medical condition, you know, either a massive amount of pain or debilitation or whatever, I gotta be honest, you tend to just kind of ramble pretty much exactly like that. So very definite props both to the writing and to McNeil for pulling it off. It was really believable. I liked that. The next thing that happens, somewhat later, is when he's further evolved and he's got the prosthetic and makeup stuff on that they won an award for, I mentioned earlier. He's talking with Janeway, and he starts off, kind of deranged and unusual, and then he starts screaming at her, and then he begs her to come back. Please don't leave. I'm so scared, and I don't know what's going, and I know you're trying your best, and I know that you'll fail. You know, the way it was demonstrating his mind completely breaking under the stress, the strain, the pain, the horror of the circumstance. It was actually really, really well done. It was awesome, is all I'm going to say. I know that sounds weird because even watching that scene, I get a little uncomfortable watching it. I don't like people being rude or impolite or whatnot. You know that. But nevertheless, I have to give props to that scene because it was very well done and very believable. Let's get back to bad stuff, shall we? Let's talk about Tom Paris's death. Yes, Tom Paris dies. Spoiler alert! Yes, he comes back. Spoiler alert! Seriously, though. Tom's death. Okay, first and foremost, let's just get this out of the way. Tom dying makes no sense on any level whatsoever. No, really, it doesn't. I'll talk about death and the nature of death of the main character in a minute, but I want to talk about this first. Tom is mutating into a lesser life form, okay? I'm with that. I understand. Okay, it's ridiculous and stupid, but I'm on board the crazy train. I'm not going to do the all aboard thing. I can't do that like Ozzy can. You know, I'm on the... Okay, so I'm on board the crazy train, and I'm listening to this, and I'm all right. Okay, so why does he die? What causes that death? Now you may say, oh, it's because his body's restructuring itself. Yes, it is, and it's doing so rapidly and so incredibly that it's actually compensating for its own deficiencies the moment it creates them. We see this before he dies and after. Why does Tom Paris die? Now, I also want to talk about one other thing before I really get into the death thing. His autopsy. Those of you who do not have a lot of medical experience, let me explain something very simple to you. The moment you die, your body starts decaying. The moment. Okay? The moment your body stops defending itself against everything that is constantly trying to or succeeding at eating it, it starts to... you get where I'm going with this, right? That's just how it works. Your body starts to bloat and, you know, all that the horrible stuff happens in the intestine. It's actually really gross if you actually know what I'm talking about. But that kind of stuff happens immediately. That's why, if you're going to do an autopsy, you want to do it pronto. You want to get that body into some place contained, and you want to get into that autopsy immediately. That's true here and now, okay? Well, okay, interesting question. Why would you ever delay an autopsy? Well, maybe you need a specific specialist? No, you're the only doctor on the ship. Okay, maybe you want to spare Kess her sensibilities? No, you invited her to come. Maybe you need a hackneyed plot device to have him come back to the dead while you're not dealing with it? Aha! Yes! That's why. That's the only reason. That is literally the only reason to delay the autopsy. And just in case you think I'm being facetious, let me make this clear. He doesn't put Tom in stasis, which is something we know they can do and have done up until this point, not just in Voyager, but in Star Trek in general. And he doesn't do anything to try and freeze him, which would be even more mundane and real life, real life kind of thing, rather than force fields and whatnot. No, he just put a blanket over him, and then plans to do it the next day. And the only reason to do that is so that Tom can then resurrect himself for absolutely no reason. There's actually a video out there on YouTube. I recommend you watch it if you haven't already. It's called Actually, I don't remember what it's called. It's basically a video about why the death and return of Superman is retarded. Actually, thinking about it, it's being portrayed by a bunch of actors and a bunch of cool people. It's really well done. Forgive me for not knowing more details about it off the top of my head. But forgive me, again, for repeating some of the things said in that video because I agree with them fully, and this is a viewpoint I've had several times. In any fictional work, the death of a main character, or even a secondary character, is not something you do lightly, and it is not something you do carelessly. That does not mean it is something you don't do. For example, let me use an example of something I think they did properly. The death of Spock. I know, you knew I was going to bring that up, didn't you? It is worth noting that the reason I think that was done properly is because they went into it planning for Spock to die, and that was it. There was no attempt, no thoughts about resurrecting him until after the movie came out, after they'd moved into post-production, did they start thinking about Star Trek 3. That was very well done. It was moving. It was impacting. It had a lasting repercussion on the characters. They did bring him back. Whether that was done properly or not is debatable, but at the very least it did make sense. Okay, I'll give it that. Next question. Or next example, excuse me. Tasha Yar. Tasha Yar's death, I'll talk about this more when I actually do my TNG series, but Tasha Yar's death was incredibly poorly done, for 100% of the reasons. I don't want to go fully into it, but the long and the short of it is, it was done for no good reason, in story or out. It was poorly executed. However, to contrast my own statement in my own way, when they brought her back via her daughter, that was well done, and well received, I might add. I actually really like it when Sela tended to show up. And in fact, I like the fact that Sela's in Star Trek Online. I think that was well done. And that's really what it comes down to. When you are going to kill off a main character, you have to do it well. And if you're going to bring them back, you have to do it well. But that second is much more dangerous. Much more dangerous. Because literally every time you bring back a main character, or a character of any variety, or any significance whatsoever to your setting, you are cutting off a finite level of believability and support and trust in your viewers. Literally finite. How much there is debatable, and individuals are going to have to determine it for themselves, basically. But the point is, you as the writer, you as the creator, have to understand that every time you do that, you have to consider that you may not be able to do that again for the entire rest of the entire series, the entire franchise. Because death cannot be made cheap. If you make death cheap like that, and when I say death cheap, I don't mean like dying is a cheap thing. I mean dying and coming back. If you make death a slap on the wrist, then it loses all impact. And at that point, all you can do is accelerate it. All you can do is make it go forward and go faster. Have them die and come back and die and come back and die and come back. The revolving door idea. Marvel and DC both have this problem. A lot. And both of them decided to do exactly what I just mentioned. They accelerated it. The reason I brought up the death of Superman is because the death of Superman was very impacting. It really was. There was a lot of build-up, a lot of interesting backstory that most people actually missed at the time, and then over the course of 1 or 2 issues, I forget, it was very short. Doomsday shows up, tears his way through everything, and kills Superman. Bam. Superman's dead. Superman's dead. That was in the papers. And this is at a point in time in which comics weren't as accepted as they are nowadays in the mainstream. That was big news. That was well done. Bringing him back... I'd like to say it's one of the most face-palming instances I've seen of that, but actually I'd be lying because I've seen much, much worse. Captain America, Flash, anyway, excuse me. So yeah, that was a mistake. And the problem is, as mentioned in that video I talked about, at that point, they realized that they could just start killing and bringing back other characters. But every time they did it, it lost some of the impact, okay? If you're going to kill off a character, you have to do it for good reason. Either you're doing it and faking it. Okay, I could understand that. Amok Time, original series, good example of what I'm talking about. Yeah, okay, I'm with that. You have to do it to have some kind of impact, some impact to the character. Let me try to think here. Impact to the character. Actually, I'm having trouble coming with a specific example of this and just this, so forgive me. I'll give an example later if I think of one. To have some impact on the characters, to have some impact on the overall theme of your work. This one's easy, Star Trek II. Spock's death and the culmination of the theme of Dante's Inferno and the weighty themes of life and death that have been throughout that whole movie, the very theatrical and the very tragic way that movie was presented. Yeah, it was a culmination of that circle and the cycle that whole movie had been going through, of life and death. Makes sense. Worked. Had proper impact. You could do it to have utter shock value. More modern shows are doing this a little bit more commonly. Walking Dead is a good example of that. Breaking Bad was actually a decent example of that. Another good example of that would be the movie Serenity. I'm actually not going to say anything else just in case you haven't seen it, but if you have, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Battlestar Galactica is another semi-decent example of killing off a main character basically for shock value. And again, shock value can be done properly when it's done properly. Now, on this massive list of things that you can have to kill off a primary or a character of significance, do you think for absolutely no reason is a good reason to do it? Because let's examine why Tom Paris dies. Let's literally examine these series of events. Tom Paris dies. The Doctor looks sad. Turns off all the things keeping him alive. Says he'll do the autopsy tomorrow. Goes into his room. Next scene, Tom Paris brings himself back from the dead. What was the impact of that? What was the significance? What was the relevance? What was the point? See, here's the thing. Rewatching this episode this time, to my astonishment, it was not the incredibly ludicrous spitting upon the series in both science and biology for the warp 10 and for the de-evolving thing that pissed me off the most. As weird as that sounds, maybe I've just been done too much in terms of writing and creating my own stuff ever since the last time I saw this episode, which was many years ago because I usually skip this episode. What pissed me off most was killing off Tom Paris for no reason. And then shrugging it off literally 45 seconds later. No. Bad. Bad. That is not what you do. There is no shock, there is no impact, there is no development, there is no purpose, there is no theme, there is nothing. That is literally as if... I can't even come up with an example. That is so stupid. Imagine, okay, I got it. Imagine if Superman had died, and literally, not even the next issue, the same issue, you turn the page, and then Superman gets up, and he's like, yeah, don't worry, I fixed myself. And then they talk, and they just move on like nothing happened. It pisses me off as a viewer because it's insulting to me to try and so artificially and with so little effort play with my interest and investment in the character and the show and the setting, and it's insulting to me as a creator and a writer to so thoroughly spit upon good writing. And that is the thing that pisses me off most about Threshold. I know it took me a while to get to it, but I wanted to address this in order. I'm not done yet, I'm sorry. Michael Jonas. This is, I said I wouldn't mention it. This is actually one of the pieces of information that is sometimes used to emphasize that this is not continuity, because Michael Jonas gives the Kazon all the data on going to Warp 10. Couple things with that. First of all, it's never referenced again ever. Of course, none of this is ever referenced again ever. Literally, none of it. Zip, zero, zilch. The freaky salamander sex, or the de-evolving, or the warp 10, none of it is ever mentioned again in the history of anything ever. That's a good thing, but I just thought I'd point it out. But, so first of all, it's never mentioned again. He just gives them the tools to Cthulhu's workshop, and they're like, okay, we'll keep in touch. What? The Kazon, whose big thing since forever has been the acquisition of better technology, don't care about the ability to go warp 10? Please. Second point. Why is he talking to this low-life kazon? What is his motivation for betraying the crew to him? Seska I could at least see, but she hasn't even shown up yet in this whole sub-story. So why is he betraying the crew to the kazon? To some random kazon? And point 3. Do you really think that the kazon would be able to do anything with this kind of technology other than destroy themselves and everything around them? No, really. These guys barely know how to use their own ships. And that's not me being hyperbolic. That's actually part of canon. Even though they'll perfectly use the Voyager during a complicated maneuver later. Let's just ignore basics for the moment. But seriously, though, do you really think the kazon could figure out Warp 10 just by being given the data on it? Now, I suppose if you wanted to be kind, you could say he just uploaded the scanner logs of the whole sector that they got, that they banged on about how wonderful they were. But A, he doesn't mention those ever at all. And B, all they talk about is the Warp 10 thing, so no, sorry. No credit. Writing 101. You have a character who has more dialogue. You have a character who is going to keep talking. What do you not do? Oh, yes, you in the back there. Yes, that's correct. You do not have them remove their own tongue and try to talk as if they don't have a tongue, even though they obviously still do. Thank you for playing. Now, let's talk about off-screen. Lord knows that the idea of what you cannot see can be more impacting, either in terms of fear or dread or suspense or whatever. That's not exactly a new idea, so I'm not even going to cover that. What I am going to cover is there is a difference between off-screen and off-camera. Now, I'm going to try and explain what I mean here. What happens is they have a camera fixture, okay? Try and picture this, right? It's right here, and they can see this one viewpoint of what's going on in engineering, and we, the viewers, actually have the viewpoint of the Doctor and Kess, who are watching this view screen. And the view screen sits there, and there's this big epic battle happening in the background, except it sounds really kind of boring, and there's some phaser fights going around, and some, really fake punching effects going on. And then the camera gets shot off. The whole thing is literally the equivalent of, if you were ever a kid with a camcorder, and you'd be like, oh my god, look, it's Godzilla! And then you'd turn the camera away, and then just make noises off the camera as if you were having this big battle with Godzilla, because you didn't know how to actually show it. I know time and budget are an issue, but really, that just felt cheap. And, here's the funny part, to immediately contradict myself and the scene to immediately contradict itself, the very next thing that happens is very effective and an example of off-screen rather than off-camera. Because the very next thing that happens is Tuvok's voice comes over and says, attention, we have a level 4 security alert. All decks to station or something like that. It's really simple, it's really plain, and the next thing that happens is the lights flicker a little bit. That was actually a lot more effective at establishing the scene, the mood, and the tonality than the damn off-camera fight, which just felt cheap. Why not just cut that out entirely and just have the Doctor and Kess, monitoring the thing, and then the Doctor says, oh, something's wrong with it. I'm not really sure what's happening. I mean, seriously, tell me this would not improve it. The Doctor's monitoring it, but he's monitoring his vitals, and suddenly the readings go blank, and the Doctor's like, oh my god, Doctor of Engineering, is he okay? What's going on? Doctor of Engineering! And then he looks at Kess, worried, and then we hear Tuvok say, level 4 security, blah blah blah, lights flicker, cut to commercial. Tell me that wouldn't have been more effective than off-screen jugglers, The funny thing is, I've been talking about this evolution thing. It's not actually until now. Well, okay. It's not actually until after. There's one thing I want to talk about basically last, and it's not after. Okay. After Paris gets free, kidnaps Janeway for some reason, takes her with him in the shuttle for some reason, goes warp 10 for some reason, that we then learn the big reveal that Tom is not actually mutating, he's evolving. He's evolving into a higher, lower form of life. That's the big reveal of the episode. Speaking as a writer, I can sympathize with the idea that it is hard to do proper payoff. And that's really what it comes down to. If you have a mystery, making that payoff worth it is difficult, and the more you elongate the mystery, the harder it's going to be to make that payoff worthwhile. It is debatable, for example, if there was any payoff that they could have done to Lost that would have actually been sufficient, because they built it up and built it up and built it up for so damn long that somewhere along the line expectations are going to overcome anything you can do, right? This is not a new concept. Half-Life 3 is another example of this type of concept in a nutshell. But when you build this thing up over the course of the episode, and then immediately follow, it's not even that much of a build-up, it's one episode, and then you follow it up, I'm sorry, that's right, it's not even a full episode, it's half an episode, because it didn't start till 19 minutes and 8 seconds in, and then you have that all of a sudden fill up with, by the way, rather than mutating or anything that makes sense, he's just evolving into a higher, lower form of life. That is not only a dissatisfying payoff, that is literally just telling you, oh, don't worry about it. Oh, but I'm not actually to the worst part yet. The second worst part, because the character death was the worst part for me. Why does he steal Janeway to mutate her as well? Why did they then mate? When did they mate? Another interesting question. Why does he continue to evolve, de-evolve, or whatever, into a salamander after having been a salamander person? Anyone? I'm just curious. No? Okay, I don't feel like going into this. I've already talked too much about this damned episode. But I got one question for you. If you were watching this whole thing, would you believe that we're about 4 minutes to the end of the episode? No? Oh, congratulations, you have a brain. I actually know several people, myself included, who thought this was a lead into a two-parter because the episode was so unresolved so far into it. Then they find the salamanders, make a really dumb joke. The salamanders have had children, which are already capable of moving and functioning on their own, which have already been conceived, been born, and are now capable of moving on and functioning on their own in 3 days, which I'm not even going to begin to go into how ridiculously stupid that is. And then there's a jump cut, a log entry, and they're perfectly fine. They have beamed back the 2 salamanders. And I want to stress, I'm calling these salamanders, I'm not really being facetious. They are lizards, about this big, you know, the mottled skin, that kind of thing. And they are now back to being completely ordinary people off camera in a log entry. They take all of the medical drama and all the interest and all the intrigue of literally over half of the entire episode of this whole de-evolution and fix it with a log entry. And the next thing we see is Janeway completely normally fine and Tom completely normally fine. Just chatting. All their memories still intact. Everything's fine. I mentioned in my last episode alliances about the thought of Voyager dying, but I gotta be honest. This episode may actually be a more appropriate point, and I'm not just talking about how awful this episode is. I'm really not. I'm talking about this moment right here. At no point in all of Star Trek has the reset button been hit so hard and so violently that we can still see the cracks from it to this day. That the whole episode and everything about it were bammed right back to square one in a log entry, off camera. And they move on as though nothing ever happened. Really? I'm almost done, I swear. You're probably wondering about my version, because I keep doing these with Voyager. I already told you my joke version, you know, cut to Barclay thing. The actual Imperium version was wildly different. It actually wasn't focused on the Voyager crew at all. It was focused on some guest stars who would actually be revealed to be working with a renegade group that had basically hired them in order to try and get Seska, Kula, and the overall alliance better technology. They were trying to emulate the warp technology of Voyager in their own way and basically failing at it, to put it as bluntly as I can. And that was basically going to be the main driving plot of the episode. And I know that sounds interesting because, speaking as a creator, that is a risk to take. To have an entire episode where the main cast are basically guest stars. But the entire point of the episode would be to very much to have a lot of information about what's going to happen, because this will be all about the conclave, and this would be the episode in which they would truly come into the foreground. There we go, and would actually be directly involved in everything that's going on. And from this point until about halfway through season 3, it would basically be a conclave storyline. And on top of, so we would get a lot of information about them, but we would see something that we wouldn't normally see, and it's the enemy's eyes. We would one of the things I wanted to do with this episode was to show that several of the people that are Voyager's enemies are still people. not necessarily good people, but still people with their own lives and their own mentalities and their own variances, that they weren't all, of the same mindset, that they weren't all wearing the same hat, that they had their own internecine conflicts. And I'm not even talking about like political and military. I'm just talking about, what they think about culture and art and history. It was supposed to be an examination of the other side of the coin, so to speak. And then the twist in my version, if you could even call it that, the reveal, I guess, would be the fact that basically all these people would die by the end of the episode, including Seska, by the way. The Conclave would move in and take over, and the final few moments of the episode would be them desperately trying to get away, and I would have one guy get away, and that one guy would become, was actually going to be Michael Jonas. He was actually going to be the one guy who survived. I say Michael Jonas, I don't mean literally, I mean the equivalent of that character, and he would be a secondary character for the next several episodes. A member of the Alliance that fled, joined the Voyager crew out of desperation, and informed them of what was to come, and that would be the way the episode would end. I told you that version because fixing Threshold without completely changing it is something I'm not sure is actually possible. And I was tempted to literally just throw in the towel on this. I spent a lot of my time today, before I watched the episode, thinking about how do I fix Threshold without completely rehashing it. Well, I have 2 bullet points here, and these are the best I got. I'm sorry. I know this is going to sound like a cop-out, but this is literally all I got. Point 1. No warp 10. I know, but seriously, no warp 10. None of this infinite speed stuff, okay? We are trying to improve our warp engines so we can increase our speed home. If that sounds familiar, it was actually the plot of the Equinox, and the way they were doing things too, if you'll remember. Okay, yeah, we're trying to go really, really fast. We're trying to really efficiently work our engines to decrease the voyage home from 70 years to like 10. Believable, makes sense, worth going for. Point 2. Why not have it be that the reason they never use this thing again is because simple exposure to that kind of energy, or perhaps the levels of subspace they're being exposed to in result of that, is why it is that Tom begins to mutate, not evolve, into this horrible thing. And let's say that Tom actually does die. Now here's the interesting part. This is the one and only thing I could think about to actually salvage this episode. Why not make Tom's death permanent? Why not make him actually die here? Why not make Tom Paris die after he had built up all his dreams and hopes of actually accomplishing something with his life, and he was willing to take the risk to go on this experimental flight after months of testing, and the simulations did not show them all that they could deal with, and they encountered variances they weren't aware of, and the net result was Tom Paris actually dies. There would be no need for the salamander plot, no need for the de-evolution. The mutation was literally a true mutation, not a video game mutation, not a Pokemon mutation. The kind of mutation that happens in real life, the kind that generally kills you. I'm not sure I like that, to be completely blunt with you. But honestly, this episode is so bad, I just cannot see any way to redeem it. So, with that, I'm going to finally stop talking about this damned episode, and I am never going to watch it again. I hope you at least enjoyed listening to me rant about it for a while. I'm going to have to turn on my monitor here to figure out how to stop the recording. So I will see you guys next time after my surgery. There we are.